Daf Yomi, Tractate Zevachim, page 85b. Just going over the last line of 85a for context, that the Gemara clarifies that this is what we are saying. Since one removes the innards of a disqualified offering from atop the altar, and they may not be returned, why do I need to rinse them? The Gemara answers the concern is that if another priest chances upon these innards and does not know that they are disqualified for the altar, he will sacrifice them upon the altar with their dung. Okay? And now we turn to 85b, top of the page. V'anan Neko neved lehu lekohanim bin sadasu be'lidei tekalo אפילו אך ידיף שלא יהיו קודשי שמיים וטולים כנבelo. The Gemara asks, and shall we stand and do something for the priests through which they shall come to encounter a stumbling block? Were these innards to remain unwashed, no priest would mistakenly sacrifice them upon the altar. The Gemara answers, even so, rinsing disqualified innards is preferable, so that the sanctified offerings of heaven should not be laying as a carcass. Also, I guess what you're saying is it's respect for something that once was sanctified. It's disqualified, but it was sanctified. You should treat it with some respect. That's why they wash it. That's how I understand it. With regard to the matter discussed by Ula in 85a, Rabbi Chia bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan raises a dilemma. In the case of sacrificial portions and offerings of lesser sanctity, that one offered up before sprinkling of their blood, which is the act which sanctifies such portions for the altar, shall they descend or shall they not descend? Amar le Rav Ami tiboilach mi'ilo Amar le mi'ilo komi boyeli Disrigo tikavlu b'mi'ilo komi boyeli Yerida upashit lo yeradu v'ein bohem mi'ilo. Rabbi Ami said to Rabbi Yochanan, instead of raising the dilemma of whether or not such portions shall descend, you should raise the dilemma of whether their ascension upon the altar sanctifies them with regard to the halachot of misuse of consecrated property. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, with regard to the misuse of consecrated property, I do not raise the dilemma, as certainly the rite of sprinkling and not their ascension to the altar determines their status with regard to the misuse of consecrated property. When Rabbi Yochanan raised the dilemma, it was with regard to their descent from the altar. And Rabbi Yochanan resolved his dilemma and ruled, if they ascended, they shall not descend, and they are not subject to the prohibition of misuse of consecrated property. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Masni Achi Amar Rav Chia bar Abba Boy Rabbi Yochanan Mori Kadosh Mkalim Sheher Lo Bnei Zrikas Damon Yesh Bohem Mi'ilo Oilo Omar Rav Ami V'ti Boilach Yerido Omar Lei Yerida Lo Kome Boyeli Yinasu Lach Moshe Rizbeach Ki Kome Boyeli Mi'ilo Poshit Hachi Lo Yerido V'en Bohem Mi'ilo. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak teaches the discussion in this manner. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan raises a dilemma in the case of sacrificial portions of offerings of lesser sanctity that one offered up on the altar before the sprinkling of their blood. Are they subject to the halachot of misuse or not? Rabbi Ami said to him, and you should raise the dilemma with regard to their descent from upon the altar. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, with regard to their descent, I do not raise the dilemma, because after these sacrificial portions ascend the altar, they become the bread of the altar and shall not descend. When I raise the dilemma, is with regard to the misuse of consecrated property. And Rabbi Yochanan resolved his dilemma in this manner: they shall not descend, and they are not subject to the prohibition of misuse of consecrated property. The Eluhein Haya Pasul, the Mishnah teaches, and these are the offerings whose disqualification did not occur in sanctity: an animal that copulated with a person, or an animal that was the object of bestiality, or blemished animals. Such offerings shall descend from the altar if they ascended. Rabbi Akiva deems blemished animals fit in the sense that if they ascended upon the altar, they shall not descend. Amar Rabbi Yochanan lo yachshir Rabbi Akiva elav bedukin shebayin hoil u'kshem lo'evois v'hu shekad v'hekdeshin es muman u'moideh Rabbi Akiva oiles nekevo de sheshikad muman hekdeshin damya. Rabbi Yochanan says Rabbi Akiva deemed fit only those animals with small blemishes, such as on the cornea of the eye, as such blemishes are fit with regard to bird offerings ab initio, and this is the halacha only when their consecration preceded their blemish, since an entire animal was fit for the altar at the time of its consecration. But if their blemish preceded their consecration, they shall descend, as they were never fit for the altar. And Rabbi Akiva concedes with regard to a female burnt offering that it shall descend from the altar, since only a male animal may be used for a burnt offering. Is like a case where the animal's blemish preceded its consecration. The Gemara presents a discussion in which the opinion of Rabbi Akiva is cited. Rabbi Yirmiyah raises the dilemma: is the disqualification of an animal that was the object of bestiality applicable with regard to birds? Or is there no disqualification of an animal that was the object of bestiality with regard to birds? Did the verse say, when any man of you brings an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering to the animals? You shall bring your offering of the animals, Leviticus 1:2? Where the term of serves to exclude from being brought as offerings both an animal copulated with a person and an animal that was the object of bestiality, in order to equate the two. If so, then derive it from it that anywhere that there is a disqualification of an animal that copulated with a person, there is a disqualification of an animal that was the object of bestiality. And anywhere that there is no disqualification of an animal that copulated with a person, there is no disqualification of an animal that was the object of bestiality. Consequently, since birds cannot be the active property, since birds cannot be the active party in an act of bestiality, the disqualification of an animal that was the object of bestiality is also inapplicable to birds. Or perhaps the disqualification of an animal was that was the object of bestiality does apply with regard to birds, as nevertheless a sin was committed with it. Okay. Amar Rabba Tashima Rabbi Akiva Machshel Lemumin. Rabba said, come and hear a proof from the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva deems blemished animals fit when the blemish is on the cornea, since such blemishes are fit with regard to bird offerings ab initio. And if it is so that a bird was the object of bestiality, is fit as an offering, then let us also deem fit an animal that was the object of bestiality, since such an offering is fit with regard to birds. From the fact that such animals are not deemed fit, conclude from the Mishnah that the disqualification of an animal that was the object of bestiality applies to birds as well. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Av Anan Nami Tanina, Anir Ve'Muktzeh Nevad Ve'etnan, Umechir Ve'tumtum Ve'androigenus, Chulan Metamin Bigadim Abes Hablion, Shmaminu. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, we learn in the Braita as well, a bird that was the object of bestiality, or that was set aside for idol worship, or that was worshipped as a deity, or that was given as payment to a prostitute, or as the price of a dog, or that was a tumtum or a hermaphrodite. In all of these cases, if its nape was pinched, it renders the garments of one who swallows an olive bulk from the carcass ritually impure when it is in the throat, as is the halakha with regard to all unslaughtered carcasses of birds. Since the Braita lists a bird that was the object of bestiality among those disqualified offerings, conclude from the Braita that such a bird is in fact disqualified. Rav Chanina Sagan HaKohanim Kulo. Mai kamashmanon liboy seim ma'aseh kamashmanon liboy seim mai doiche kila achar yad. The Mishnah teaches Rav Chanina, the deputy high priest, says, "My father would reject blemished animals from upon the altar." The Gemara asks, what is Rabbi Chanina teaching us? The first time already stated that blemished animals shall descend. The Gemara answers, if you wish, say, that Rabbi Chanina teaches us an incident to express that this halacha was not only stated theoretically, but applied practically as well. And if you wish, say instead, what is the meaning of the term would reject? It means that he would remove blemished animals from the altar in a backhanded manner, meaning privately rather than publicly, so as not to disgrace the honor of the altar. Keshem shimala kulo kule amar ula lo yishmera shloima shlovehen au avama shlovehen au yalu. The Mishnah teaches with regard to those disqualified offerings that shall not descend from the altar if they ascended it. If they ascended it, just as if it ascended, it does not descend, so too if it descended, it does not then ascend. Ula says, the sages taught this halacha only in the case where the fire has not yet taken hold of these offerings. But if the fire has taken hold of these offerings, then even if they descended from the altar, they shall descend. Rav Mari Masnia Reisha, Rav Chanina Mesua, Masnia Seifa, Hatzamas Yagidin, Yakaunayim Yatarofim. בזמן שכבו ינעלו בראשו יעלו אמרו לה לא ישאלו אלא שלא משלו בהן ההוא אבל משלו יעלו. Rav Mari teaches that the statement of ruler is referring to the first clause, meaning to this Mishnah. Rav Chanina's Surah teaches that Ula is referring to the latter clause, meaning to the next Mishnah, which states the bones and the tendons and the horns and the hooves of a burnt offering, when they are attached to the flesh of the offering, they shall ascend upon the altar and be sacrificed with the offering. If they separated from the flesh of the offering, they shall not ascend. With regard to this, Ula says, the sages taught that if they separated from the flesh, they shall not ascend only in a case where the fire has not yet taken hold of them. But if the fire has taken hold of them, then even they separated from the flesh. Then even if they separated from the flesh of the offering, they shall ascend. Man Tana the Mastir Sefer Koshkena Reisha Man the Mastir Reisha Abu Besefer Lav Bnei Haktorinu. The Gemara elaborates according to the one who teaches Ula's statement, meaning if the fire has taken hold of them, they still ascend the altar, as referring to the latter clause which discusses items that are not burned on the altar. All the more so will Ula's statement apply to the first clause, which discusses items that were burned on the altar but were disqualified. And according to the one who teaches Ula's statement, as referring to the first clause, it applies only to those items that were to be burned on the altar but were disqualified. But with regard to the latter clause, it does not apply, since the bones, tendons, and other items mentioned there are not subject to burning at all. That concludes the Talmud for that Mishnah, the Talmud portion, and now we start a new Mishnah. Zog the Mishnah velo im alu yeldu basar kodesh kedoshim ubasar kodesh kalim umoisoi mer ushtel lechem ulechem panim ushiyom menachas v'zaris. And these are the items that, if they ascended upon the altar, they descend, because they are completely unfit for the altar. The meat of offerings of the most sacred order meaning a guilt offering and a sin offering, the meat of which is eaten by the priests, and the meat of offerings of lesser sanctity which is eaten by the owners, and the surplus of the Omer meal offering brought on the second day of Passover, after the handful was removed and burned on the altar, and the 2 loaves meal offering brought on the festival of Shavuot, and the showbread, and the remainder of the meal offerings after the handful was removed, which are all eaten by the priests, and the incense that ascended upon the external altar, and not the golden altar where it should be burned. Hatzemer sheberash kevasim, v'se'ar shebezagin tiyashim, v'ha'atzamot, v'hagidim v'hakanayim v'hatlafim, b'zman shemechubarim ya'alu, shneimar v'tzir ha'kohen et hakol. Pershu lo ya'alu, shneimar v'yasita olatecha habasar v'yadam. With regard to the wool that is on the heads of the sheep brought as burnt offerings, and the hair that is in the beard of goats that were sacrificed, and the bones and the tendons and the horns and the hooves, when they are attached to the flesh of the offering, they shall ascend upon the altar and be sacrificed with the offering, as it is stated, and the priest shall make the whole smoke on the altar. Leviticus 1:9. If they separated from the flesh of the offering, they shall not ascend, as it is stated. And you shall offer your burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood. Deuteronomy 12:27, and nothing else. That's the Mishnah, and now for the Talmud. Zok the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan v'yitira kohen esakol le'mizbeichol le'ra'avois atzomis v'gidin ha'kanayim v'atlafim. The sages taught in the Braita, and the priest shall make the whole smoke on the altar. Leviticus 1:9. The term the whole serves to include the bones and the tendons and the horns and the hooves among those items that are sacrificed on the altar. One might have thought that even if they are separated from the flesh of the burnt offering, they are sacrificed upon the altar. Therefore the verse states, and you shall offer your burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood. Deuteronomy 12:27, indicating that only those items and anything attached to them are sacrificed upon the altar. If one derives the halacha with regard to bones and tendons from the phrase the flesh and blood, to be continued.